Chapter 580, The Absolute End of the Two Realms. After leaving Zhang Yi 800 meters away, Wu Di's hands opened towards Zhang Yi, and with a light rebuke, countless tiny light points suddenly appeared all around him. The number of them was so great that it was as if countless rainbow bubbles had been blown up, densely packed, and soon they soared into the air, almost completely covering the entire area of the martial arts field. After a moment, they flew around Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi cautiously stared at them, and they did not explode at first. It was like a large bubble, forming a spherical cloud with a radius of 800 meters around Zhang Yi. Wu Di looked at Zhang Yi and muttered, "I specially prepared this move for you. Its name is..." There are a total of 300,000 miniature drifting cannons, and they will continue to explode for 2 minutes. Now, even if you use that weird space ability, you won't be able to defend yourself. Although the floating cannon has been turned into tiny particles, its lethality is still strong enough. Wu Di doesn't want to kill Zhang Yi. As long as he can make Zhang Yi look like a loser, he will consider it a win. Because of this kind of move, he can still use it 3 more times. Explode. Wu Di doesn't waste any time. Once the bubble cloud is formed, he immediately starts detonating the miniature floating cannons one after the other. 300,000 light particles from the floating cannons explode one after the other, covering an area of 800 meters. Even if Zhang Yi wants to escape, he can't. Even if he wants to hide in a different dimension, he will only have 1 minute of hiding time at most. In other words, Zhang Yi can hardly dodge this move. The explosion on the scene lit up with bright light and shadow, like countless soap bubbles bursting in the sunlight. Everyone stared at the scene in the center of the field, hoping to know how Zhang Yi would respond to such a move. Even in the eyes of Deng Shentong and by Li Changqing, this kind of move is difficult to dodge, and the only way to deal with it is to use a strong defensive ability to withstand it. But Zhang Yi is not an enhanced alien, and he does not have that kind of terrifying defensive ability. Although the training suit can protect his body, it will also directly determine that he loses the match based on the extent of his injuries. Even Uncle Yu and Liang Yu, who were the most confident in Zhang Yi, couldn't help but change their expressions when they saw this move used by Wu Di. This move was created completely for Zhang Yi. They finally understood why Zhang Yi was so strict about keeping his own information secret, and even the people around him could not know the whole picture. Because once your abilities become known to others, your weaknesses will also be infinitely magnified in the eyes of your opponents. Even a high-level Delta alien can be targeted by the opponent's methods, causing significant damage. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the martial arts field. They all wanted to see if Zhang Yi had any way to resist this move that specifically targeted his abilities. The explosion of the floating bubbles that lasted for 3 minutes created a dazzling visual effect and hindered the ability of the crowd to observe the scene in the arena. However, after 3 minutes, the voice of the arena system that Wu Di wanted to hear did not appear. After the lights went down, Zhang Yi stood in the same place, unharmed. His expression was very calm, as if nothing had happened. Everyone was shocked by this scene. They had thought that Zhang Yi could take this move, but they definitely could not imagine that Zhang Yi could take it so perfectly and not be hurt in the slightest. For the first time, Deng Shentong's eyes flashed with surprise. Interesting, really interesting. It seems that he is stronger than the intelligence from the big region recorded. In another box, Zhu Jing was also puzzled. How did this kid do it? He shouldn't have the ability to defend so perfectly. Behind him, Sun Luxuan pushed his glasses up and smiled, saying, "I think I see what's going on." Tu Yunlai also nodded in secret. It really is a very interesting defensive skill. This guy has maxed out his defensive skills. Seeing Zhu Zheng and Lan Xingqing's puzzled expressions, Sun Luxuan explained for them. Just as the explosion occurred, he opened up a perfect defensive wall. It absorbed all attacks from all directions. Upon hearing this, Zhu Jing spoke out. Martial Arts Hall, analyze the just concluded battle scene. This martial arts hall is used for alien combat. Through the training suits and the monitoring system in the martial arts hall, the data on the alien's supernatural powers can be perfectly obtained. Of course, it can also help aliens improve the weaknesses in their abilities. As soon as Zhu Jing spoke, there was an immediate response, and it was presented in the form of a three-dimensional image. In the image, as the 300,000 floating light particles began to explode one after the other, Zhang Yi suddenly opened a spherical membrane barrier around him. It was a door to a different dimension. And it was different from the he had used before. This time, the spatial door was spherical. It completely enveloped his entire body. Zhu Zheng's eyes were a little shocked. Isn't this absolute defense? Sun Luxuan smiled and said, there is no absolute defense in this world. If there is, it is just that the power of attack is not strong enough. Lan Xinqing, however, frowned slightly and said curiously, but from beginning to end, he has been defending with all kinds of means. Isn't this kind of person too cautious? If he only defends, then how is he going to attack? Everyone was curious about this question. However, when Zhang Yi appeared unharmed in the martial arts arena, everyone had already realized that Zhang Yi was at least unbeaten. An outsider with absolute defense is inherently unbeaten. Zhang Yi calmly looked at Wu Di, and from Wu Di's eyes, he could see a strong sense of shock and unwillingness. Wu Di gritted his teeth and said in disbelief, how is that possible? How could you possibly block my attack? I have thoroughly studied your abilities. You simply cannot block this move. Even if the power of my floating light particles has greatly diminished, it is not enough to injure you. He was a little panicked inside, so he opened his arms again, and the sky full of floating bubbles and shadows rose up to the sky, and he was going to try again. Don't waste your energy. Zhang Yi looked at Wu Di coldly. He had to admit that if it was a month ago, he would have been in a very embarrassing situation if he encountered this kind of technique. But after absorbing the essence of Yuan Kong Yi, his skills had also evolved, an upgrade in the subtle manipulation of supernatural powers. Zhang Yi's body did not move, and a spherical dimensional wall directly appeared around him, firmly enveloping his entire body. Now, he was separated from the real world by an entire different dimension. Unless the attack exceeded the limit of his dimensional gate's energy tolerance, nothing could attack him past this defense. This technique could be called as absolute defense, a perfect barrier. Chapter 581 draws attention. Wu Di's attack came again, but an attack of this level could not cause any damage to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi knew that his battle would definitely attract attention. Therefore, he could not fight for too long to avoid exposing his strength. However, he would not use his divine power or the new killing move he had just comprehended. After all, he had no intention of killing Wu Di. So he just calmly raised his pistol and shot at Wu Di. At this time, Wu Di was still in shock. Faced with Zhang Yi's shooting, he subconsciously used the ability of the aperture to resist. But this time, the dark bullet directly pierced through his aperture defense and landed on his body. Ah! Wu Di's body was in pain, his expression distorted, and he covered his chest in pain, kneeling on the ground. At this time, the broadcast voice of the martial arts arena sounded in everyone's ears. Martial arts competition over, Wu Di, defeated. The sudden end of the battle did not surprise anyone. This was how battles between advanced aliens were fought, with the outcome decided in an instant. A momentary lapse of concentration, a minor weakness exposed, could decide the outcome of life and death in an instant. Wu Di could not believe his ears. This bullet. He looked at the ground, where a dark bullet lay quietly. It was this bullet that had pierced his defensive aura and landed on his training uniform. Because of the protection of the training uniform, he was not pierced through, but the system in the martial arts arena had already judged him to have lost based on the degree of damage. Get up. The origin bullet. How did you have something like this? Wu Di shouted in disbelief towards Zhang Yi in the distance. It was just that the two were too far apart, and Zhang Yi did not hear what he was shouting. Zhang Yi just gave a faint smile. The outcome is clear, so this battle is over. After saying that, he turned around and walked away. But everyone saw this scene clearly. Deng Shintong looked at Zhang Yi's departing back, and a light was blooming in his eyes. This guy is really smart. Even Liao Honglei and Bai Chunyu behind him couldn't help but look sideways. First, he used an ordinary bullet to make Wu Di careless, and then mixed it with an origin bullet. Such an attack is indeed very easy to make a mistake. But in the end, it's just that Wu Di's combat experience is too shallow. Liao Honglei spoke with some contempt for Wu Di. He crossed his arms and smiled faintly. If we veterans of the military were there, we would never have made such a mistake. And we would never have given Zhang Yi the opportunity to shoot. Next to him, the feminine-looking Bai Chunyu smiled lightly and said, "But he is indeed a person with great combat talent, isn't he? Knowing how to make use of one's strengths and avoid one's weaknesses is quite rare." Deng Shintong ignored the words of the two subordinates behind him. He looked at Zhang Yi with eyes full of admiration. Then he thought to himself, the investigation team has a fixed composition and cannot increase the number of people at will. This Zhang Yi is already qualified to become a full member of the heavenly team, but why not kick Luing Hao out of the team? His strength is already holding everyone back. In the box where Zhu Jing was, everyone's eyes were burning with excitement in the face of Zhang Yi's victory. Being able to defeat Wu Di shows that Zhang Yi has the strength of an elite member of the investigation team. After all, Wu Di was also among the top of the Black Robe investigation team. It seems that our intelligence on Zhang Yi was indeed wrong. Zhu Jing frowned slightly. Was it because Zhang Yi hid it well, or did Bai Li Changqing hide it when he reported to him? No, it can't be considered that way. Bai Li Changqing had already reported Zhang Yi's abilities truthfully, and indeed he was an outsider who was good at defense. From an offensive perspective, he is more skilled in using his mind than having powerful offensive supernatural abilities. This only shows that this person's supernatural abilities are not powerful enough to be offensive, but that he is just very good at fighting. But why does he have an origin bomb? Zhu Jing said, looking at the secretary Lan Xinqing next to him. The origin bomb is a Huaxia secret. It was jointly developed by the technical departments of the 6 major regions, and both the materials and the production process are kept strictly confidential. Even in Blizzard City, only a few people such as Yun Yan, the investigation team, and the escorts around the senior management of the headquarters have this thing. Because the materials used are so rare, ordinary people simply don't have the opportunity to use it. No wonder Zhu Jing is sensitive. Lan Xinqing hurriedly reported, perhaps he happened to get a few of them when the Black Robe Squad was on a mission in Tianhai City. I will go and confirm with Zhang Yi and Bai Li Changqing. Zhu Jing nodded. If that's the case, then it's fine. A few of them have been lost, and it's fine for others to use them. This Zhang Yi can be considered for future use. Lan Xinqing saw Zhu Zheng's appreciation for Zhang Yi and couldn't help but ask, Commander, do you want to transfer him to Blizzard City? Let someone train him, and then consider incorporating him into the Yanyan troops, or assigning him to a certain investigation team. Zhu Jing thought about it for a while, but then waved his hand. No, not yet. After all, he is the leader of the Tianhai City aliens. Tianhai City is in a state of disarray, and its combat effectiveness has decreased sharply. If we remove him from Tianhai City, it will not be peaceful there in the future. Lan Xinqing heard this and said, the commander is thinking. Lan Xinqing had been with Zhu Jing for many years and knew his temper well. The subtext of these words was that although he appreciated Zhang Yi a little, he had not yet come to like him. After all, the strength Zhang Yi has shown is at most average among the investigation team and Yanyan forces. Zhang Yi left the martial arts field and went to the second floor. Bai Li Changqing looked at Zhang Yi with no surprise in his eyes. Thank you for sparing me. Zhang Yi said nonchalantly, it was just that. Wu Di was a nobody and Zhang Yi never took him seriously. As for the weapons, what do you say? Bai Li Changqing laughed and said, if you're in such a hurry, I can take you there to get it later. The investigation team's weapons arsenal is located in the combat center, not very far from here. Zhang Yi nodded, okay, I'll go change first. Speaking of the training suit on his body, Zhang Yi really couldn't help but love it. Although the protective suit he previously wore had very strong defensive capabilities and was equipped with many modern technological devices, it was definitely not as powerful as this black tights. Not only is it extremely protective, but it can also improve a person's basic physical abilities, which is terrifying. Zhang Yi really wants to get a set, wear it as an inner layer, and then wear it with a combat uniform, and it would be perfect. But for now, he can only think about it, because Bai Li Changqing is not going to give him a set of this high-tech equipment. Fortunately, he has Lu Karen. Zhang Yi looked over at Lu Karen, who nodded at him with a confident gleam in his eyes. A smile lifted the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth. He was going to get his hands on this good stuff.